And they kept saying, don't worry about it. Read Jeremiah. Don't worry about it, Jeremiah. What are you talking about that Babylon's going to come and conquer us? We're God's people. We're the lineage of Abraham. There's no way God's going to ever hurt us. He's never going to come and punish us. He's not going to allow those nasty Babylonians, those heathens, to come and conquer us. Jeremiah, you don't know what you're talking about. Shut up. Are some of us today kind of thinking we can just kind of float along and do our own thing? God will always bless us? I don't know. I don't know. Here's a man whose heart's with God, undeniably. And he feels and senses the guilt of what his forefathers committed. Remember, he says, verse 8, the instruction that you gave your servant Moses, saying, if you are unfaithful, I will scatter you among the nations. But if you return to me and obey my commands, then even if your exiled people are at the farthest horizon, I will gather them from there and bring them to the place I have chosen as a dwelling for my people, my name. They are your servants and your people, whom you redeemed by your great strength and your mighty hand. O Lord, let your ear be attentive to the prayer of this your servant and to the prayer of your servants who delight in revering your name. Give your servant success today by granting him favor in the presence of this man. I was a cupbearer to the king. Do you think God could reject a prayer like that? Do you think God would even give it a second thought? You see, here's a prayer that's totally unself-centered. Totally selfless. And he wants to do something for his betterment? No. He wants to do something for the betterment of the people? Not necessarily. He wants to do something for the betterment of what? God's reputation and God's prestige in the world of antiquity, where the walls of the capital city say a whole lot about the God that they serve and follow. This is a great man. And we're going to go into some basic principles that he taught and followed in just a moment. I want to read the first 4 verses of the next chapter, 5 verses. In the month of Nisan, in the 20th year of King Artaxerxes, when wine was brought for him, I took the wine and gave it to the king. I had not been sad in his presence before, so the king asked me, why does your face look so sad when you are not ill? This can be nothing but sadness of heart. He's concerned about it. Wouldn't you be concerned about the guy that's going to feed you? And taste it first. If he's not feeling good or whatever, he's upset or whatever, he's not happy. You come before the king in those days, you better be happy. They didn't want to see any sad faces, okay? Or they'd cut your head off. So you don't go to the king looking sad. But he's the king's cupbearer, you know. The king's concerned about it. He says, what is it you want? Verse 4. Then I prayed to the God of heaven, a quick prayer now, Lord, help me here because my life lays in the balance here. And then I answered the king, if it pleases the king, and if your servant has found favor in his sight, let him send me to the city in Judah where my fathers are buried so that I can rebuild it. You know the rest of the story. And so we're going to look at the principles of Nehemiah. He was a cupbearer to the king of Persia. Nehemiah's concern was for the people and for God's reputation. Kind of unique, isn't it? Nehemiah didn't just grieve over the city, he prayed for the city. And he was concerned about the neglected walls and what they revealed. I was talking to someone here just a moment ago about why people leave the church. And I told her I think there's 2 primary reasons why. Either too much worldliness has gotten into the person, or the person is not getting their needs met by the church. Now, a lot of times the needs are what we would call wants today. I mean, I don't get entertained enough, I don't, or maybe the elders aren't supplying what I want, or the church doesn't do for me what I want. You see? And too many times our decisions about the church center on self-serving. Because you see, we're members of the church regardless of what our leadership's like. We're members of the church and we're God's people regardless of what the building looks like. Because today the building may represent to the community that we're not taking very good care of it. That may say something. But it doesn't necessarily say anything about God today, does it? But much of what's going on today in the church, in my opinion, and in the world, has to do with self-serving. And so our decisions, whether or not we're going to stay with the church, whether or not we're going to do what we can to help the church, has to do with what's in it for me. This is the guy that has nothing to do with that kind of thinking. He believes that it's his job to make sure God's reputation is intact. So Nehemiah shows that a leader must, first of all, see the need. And you think, well, that's a simple thing. I mean, shouldn't all leaders see the need? Not necessarily. It depends on what kind of need you're talking about. Do you see the need as a leader of what people need, or do you see the need as a leader as to what the institution needs? There's a big difference there, isn't there? And so if I see what the institution needs, well, we need carpeted floors. People aren't going to come in here unless your floors are carpeted. And you know, everybody today has chairs. I mean, these pews got to go. I'm sorry, these pews, you got to get on this, preach a couple sermons on pews. You know, they got to go because they're not what's happening today. People don't like sitting in pews because that takes them back to the 50s. Oh, we don't want to go back to the church of the 50s, you know. I mean, that's dinosaur days. You know? So we got to have chairs, and we ought to be able to move the chairs around so we can have a basketball court in here. You know, let's get with the thing over here, Mike. I mean, you know, if you want to bring the people in here, say. And so, what need are we talking about here? See, in my opinion, I may be way off, but I think, in my opinion, a leader should look at the needs of people before he ever looks at the needs of the physical buildings or the financial state of the church. That's secondary. God's got all the money we need anyway. What difference does that make? I mean, it's good to watch your budget. I'm not saying to be frivolous about spending money, but I'm simply saying that can't be priority one. But if you're an institutional thinker, that's priority one. What's the budget say? There's always a brother or two that'll come up to you and say, okay, elder, what's the budget for this year? And they come up to me and ask me what the budget is. I don't know. I haven't got a clue. Why don't you have a clue? You're an elder. Because I'm not the one in charge of that. Well, who is? I don't know. Ask the other elder. Maybe he can tell you. But you're in charge. I said, I'm not in charge of the budget. Yes, I'm not. If the money comes in and we spend it and we got money still to spend, then we do it. I don't really care about the budget. Well, wait a minute. That's not the way it's supposed to be. You're an elder. You know, you're supposed to be a superintendent. And I said, well, you know, we do take care of the budget to some degree. We talk about it in our elders' meetings. We try to get through it as fast as possible because one elder is more tuned into that than the rest of us. So he hands us out these sheets and we can't understand. We couldn't figure it out if our lives depend upon it. We trust him. He's doing a good job with it, see? So we'll look at it, kind of mouth it a little bit, and he'll say, well, what do you think about that? I think, oh, it's a great budget. Have you read it? No, I don't know how to read it, but it's a great budget. Because we're not concerned about budgets. Oh, holy budget, Richard Budget used to say. It's funny, some of his meetings, he talked about this, Richard Rogers, I don't know if you know who he is, he used to preach it and teach at Sunset, you know, one of my favorite teachers, but he always say, oh, holy budget, you know, everybody's round down to the budget. You see, a relational leader's not too worried about the budget. And I always found that, you know, if you're a good relational leader and you got good leaders, when a problem comes up and you don't have the money, guess what? The church gives it to you. If you can tell them this is a need, they'll usually come up with it. And if they don't, then maybe it's not a need that you have to deal with or worry about. Well, it's a total different thinking here, folks. As a psychologist, you see, I'm stressing this point because our psychology and how we see things is so vitally important as to what we do and whether it's pleasing God and biblical. And so, we have to put first things first. What's the most important thing? People. People. That's what God is all about. Jesus didn't come to save buildings, did he? Okay? He came to sacrifice himself to save souls. People. That's what Jesus was about. He didn't have a house to live in. He didn't have a roof over his head. And, you know, whether or not he'd have food enough that day to eat, I don't guess he was too worried about it. The disciples were worried about it. Because he was a people person. And that's what is important. See the need of the people, of the flock. Care about the need. It's important to see the need, but you got to care about the need. Pretty simple stuff, isn't it? But if you have the right psychological viewpoint of what the Bible says, then it's important that you do that. Know where to take the need first. Prayer is not a last resort. And we've all done this, haven't we? We're in trouble. We're in trouble. It's a problem. We better pray then, huh? Well, maybe before the problem and you saw it coming, why don't you pray before that problem actually got to the point where it's at? Why don't you be praying every day about the church anyway? And, you know, we get in trouble, you know, it's an old foxhole kind of conversion mindset, you know. We're in a foxhole now, we're in trouble, you know. And everybody else is deserted, we're in trouble, we better pray. See, Nehemiah prayed as soon as he realized that something was going wrong with God's people. And he prayed before he even had a plan. He prayed before he even